Well, I would like to start by thanking you all for coming out on one of the more challenging afternoons of the whole year to come to an event through town and over here. Appreciate that. So I'm Hans Voss. I'm the Executive Director of the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities here at Traverse City. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Great Lakes and some important issues and opportunities for you to get involved as a citizen and as an advocate. Before we get going though, I want to just kind of recognize where we are. The Blue Water Event Center is quite a place, and I look forward to future events here. I appreciate the support of the crew here. And we're here in part because our advisory council member, Cheryl Hutchinson, pulled this together, and Cheryl's somewhere. She's over there. So this event's happening because Cheryl put the work into pulling it together, so thank you so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Line 5 and what's happening right now. And then Howard Lerner from Chicago Environmental Law and Policy Center is going to come up and talk a little bit about some broader Great Lakes funding issues and other risks and concerns about the Great Lakes, and again, how you can get involved. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. There's bathrooms around the corner in the bar there, if that's needed. And then just so you know, I know a lot of folks wanted to come. My phone's kind of lighting up with folks that said, I can't get through Traverse City, I don't think I'll make it. But that's okay because we have the whole thing videotaped, and we'll put that on our Facebook page and our website so you can get it out to people, or you can rewatch it if there are some things you missed or want to comment on. So a little bit about Groundwork before we get rolling. I know there's a lot of friends here, supporters, but some new faces as well. The Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities is based right downtown on Front Street, and for 20 years we were called the Michigan Land Use Institute. We changed our name 2 years ago. And we focus on resilience, building economic and environmental resilience in this region. We do that through programs focusing on building the local food system, creating more access to locally grown healthy food, through advancing land use and transportation initiatives to help build stronger downtowns and walkable communities. And one of the pieces we're working on is connecting northern Michigan to Ann Arbor by passenger rail, which if you stay in touch with us, you'll hear quite a bit about because there's a formal study happening this summer. And we also do a fair bit of clean energy advocacy. If you're interested in solar, electric vehicles, kind of looking to participate in transitioning towards a cleaner energy future, our organization is coordinating a number of initiatives here in this region locally. So much of our work is focused on the ground in this region, but from time to time we get involved in higher profile statewide issues where we think we can make a difference. And Line 5 is one of those examples. So as a local group, when we see opportunities to make a contribution where our role can help get something done, we gather with the board and the advisory council and the staff and say, can we make a difference on this issue? And Line 5 has been one of those examples. It was 2013 when we heard about the Line 5, that Line 5 existed. And I think all of us have that moment where you're like, really? There's a 64-year-old pipeline sitting on the bottom of the lake under the Mackinac Straits that carries 23 million gallons of oil every day? Really? It's just there? And then you go online, you see the pictures, you learn about it. And we didn't know about it in 2013. Once we found out, we thought our communications network, our grassroots organizing, can raise the profile and make people aware. The first goal of our involvement was to publicize. So right away we got involved in a pretty massive outreach campaign. We did a series of commercials statewide. We created a website, and we organized a group called Oil and Water Don't Mix, which is a coalition of 70 different environmental groups and thousands of citizens that are working together from a grassroots effort to shut down Line 5. It's a very clear message. And that initiative, which has grown now to a statewide campaign, has really made Line 5 one of the very top environmental issues in the state. Really, now it's an issue that politicians are accountable to. Where do you stand on Line 5? With upcoming elections, it's now a really important question, and we're really excited about some of the progress that we've made, which I'll tell you about today. A lot of us have taken this Line 5 issue seriously because in 2010, Enbridge, the same company that operates Line 5, had the biggest oil spill, inland oil spill in American history on the Kalamazoo River near Marshall. So if you're tracking how these pipelines can break, that was the worst one that's ever happened inland in the country's history. Over 1 million gallons of oil leaked, and it ran for 17 hours before people recognized that it was leaking. So the studies have shown that pipelines leak, that just happens, and there's lots of documented releases over the course of time in Enbridge's Great Lakes system. And our opinion is any risk of a pipeline leak in the middle of the Great Lakes is intolerable, that we have to be assured that we can protect the Great Lakes. And from our view, Enbridge's claims that it won't leak are just not credible, that we don't need to do a risk assessment. What we need to do is make a clear plan to make sure that the Great Lakes are protected permanently, and our way of life and our economy and our environment that define who we are in this region stays secure. And that's the goal of our work over the last 4 years. It's important to note that Michigan in 1953 signed an easement for the use of the Great Lakes bottomlands, which gives the state authority over that pipeline, held by the Attorney General and the Governor. What our goal is to help the state leaders realize the urgency and exercise that authority. And recently, in order to put more pressure and build more momentum, we built what's called the Great Lakes Business Network. Some of you are a part of this, but it is a network now of almost 100 businesses who have signed up on this campaign to raise their voice from the private sector to say, this is an economic risk for our region. And companies like Cherry Republic, American Spoon Foods in Petoskey, Shorts Brewery, Larry Bell's one of our biggest champions, the founder of Bell's Brewery, the Great Lakes Potato Chip Company, M22. These are companies that recognize that our future economically is tied to clean lakes. And their voice is very important as well. But what's happening now is that after almost 2 years of study, the Great Lakes Pipeline Safety Advisory Board just this week released alternatives, recommendations on what to do. A lot of assessment, a lot of study, and they have looked at different options, and this report is online. You can access it through our website. It's 337 pages long. So guys like us will help you decipher that with our own comments that we're working on now. In the next week or two, you'll see a full set of analysis from our organization and other partners. But what it says is, well, let's look at the different options. And they've looked at just decommissioning the pipeline and looking at other ways of accessing oil into our state. They're looking at tanker cars and rail cars as an alternative to pipelines. And there's an issue that maybe you've heard about, an option that they put on the table, which is to dig a tunnel under the Straits, decommission Line 5, dig a new tunnel under the Straits, and then lay a fresh pipeline in that tunnel. What they haven't addressed in this report is that Michigan isn't benefiting significantly from this pipeline. That the vast majority of this oil, up to 80% of the oil, comes down through Canada, across to be refined in Sarnia, and then is shipped to the northeast U.S. and a significant portion overseas. So what we've studied and what we've brought forward is that Michigan can get its oil from existing pipelines. And our case will be that we do not need Line 5 to operate our economy. And over the long haul, we don't want to be investing significant new dollars in fossil fuel infrastructure when the forecasts are our need for more oil will be declining because we'll be using more electric cars, we'll be conserving energy, and we'll be running on a cleaner fuel system. And that isn't in that report. So you'll hear a lot about that from Groundwork as we submit our comments. Now, Attorney General Bill Schuette is a very important player in this drama. 2 years ago, he said very confidently and prominently that the days are numbered for Line 5 and that it would never be put in place today. And he's been pretty aggressive in this last week. He said a statement that they want to quote a specific timeline for decommissioning. So the Attorney General, who has the authority, is calling on a measurable timeline to decommission Line 5. So that's pretty good news. It says to us that in the center of Michigan politics, a man who's running for governor next year has seen this as such an important popular priority that he's using his stature as Attorney General to use this language, to really forcefully call for decommissioning Line 5. He's mentioned early on, without any assessment, that a tunnel idea just sounds great. That concerns us. It's also a concern that his language over the last 2 years has not resulted in any action. So he has the authority. For 2 years there's been studies, and our concern is with the election coming up next fall, it's unclear how accountable he will be to a timeline. And that's the goal that we have, is to say, that's great, Attorney General, we appreciate that, now let's work together on a timeline before the next election. Let's make that something that we get done as a state under your leadership. So we don't accept that as we're done. We accept that as we are nearing a tipping point. We just haven't quite got there yet. And that's the excitement of this campaign. That's the power of grassroots organizing on this issue. I mean, literally, we didn't even know about it 4 years ago. And after hundreds of public events and thousands of people contacting the governor, the attorney general, their legislators, in the media, working in communities around the state where almost 100 communities have signed resolutions at the township and city and county level opposing Line 5, we have created a grassroots campaign like I've never seen before. And now here we are, a year and 3 months out from an election, and it's now front and center as the #1 environmental issue in the state of Michigan. And we now have an opportunity to contribute and step up our engagement. For the next 5 weeks, until August 5th, these recommendations coming out of the advisory board are open for public input. So it's our chance to do it again, even if we've already sent our comments in, to get your voice out there. There's a hearing here in Traverse City on July 24th, right at the Hagerty Center. And we really need to pack that. We need to show up in person. On your table there is a simple little comment card that you can give to us, and we'll send straight to the governor and the attorney general. But also I encourage you all to go to the website Oil and Water Don't Mix. There's no apostrophe after don't. oilandwaterdon'tmix.org, because that is the central clearinghouse for citizen action. And there will be plenty of information as we submit our comments and do our analysis. That will be there. I encourage you to sign up with our organization as a member to stay in touch. Our team is on this issue on a week-to-week basis, and as a member you get lots of updates and opportunities to voice your thoughts. And if you're not ready to be a member, that's okay. Just sign our little sheet and let's stay in touch with us, and if the time feels right to join, we'd certainly love to have you. So I've gone completely off my notes here, which I always do when I do this kind of thing. So if you have any additional questions about Line 5 and what to do, I'm Hans, I'm the director of the organization. We have a handful of staff here and some board and advisory council members. Know that this community has led the charge on Line 5. This is the place that this concern was identified and where the grassroots action, and there are dozens of organizations, the Indian tribes, local governments, different environmental conservation organizations in this region, and we're really, I think, in a position to carry it this final step. I think that in the next 6 months, we could see this turn one way or the other. And waiting indefinitely is not an option for us. So that's our spirit. I encourage you to stay in touch with us. If you're interested in the Great Lakes Business Network, if you have a business, you're affiliated with a business, or if you know another business that might want to get involved, that's been a really influential policy tool, really a strategic voice in this conversation. So, thank you for hearing about that, and thank you for all of you who've been a part of this campaign, and thanks to Dennis Pierce, who's been one of our very first supporters who actually funded the first commercials. We've never done commercials in our organizations, but we need to do okay, so Howard Lerner's here, which is a great day for Traverse City. We're happy to have Howard Lerner. He's a longtime friend and a partner. And when we first started talking about Line 5 with Howard, his organization, Environmental Law and Policy Center, does law and policy. And when we get into federal issues, we turn to Howard and say, what's our best strategy here? And they file lawsuits to protect the environment at ELPC, but Howard, after it seemed like 5 minutes of analysis, said, this is not a legal issue. This is you won't win this in the courts, you'll win this in the court of public opinion. This is a grassroots organizing opportunity. And that was really important advice because, you know, when you're faced with a big challenge like this and you choose a legal route, it can prevent the public from knowing about it. It can dampen the sense of grassroots momentum. And Howard had that perspective, and we went straight to grassroots organizing, and 4 years later, here we are at the cusp of a major victory. But Howard brings that because he's been doing this work for 25 years. ELPC, Environmental Law and Policy Center, is right downtown Chicago. They work in the Midwest on a number of environmental issues, always solutions oriented. We've learned a lot from Howard and his organization over the years, and they have an office in Grand Rapids. And I really say that in my work, I've had the pleasure of working with a number of nonprofit EDs around the country, and I don't know, and there are many who compare to Howard in his ability to really dig down, figure out the facts, develop a strategy and a message, and win, and end up with outcomes and victories. And we brought that spirit into our organization when we started in 1995, and had the chance to partner and collaborate over the years. So it's great that Howard's here. He didn't pick a great day to come up, but hey, we're happy you're here. We're happy you guys are here. And I just want to pass it over to Howard Lerner, who's going to talk a little bit about some broader Great Lakes issues. Thanks so much.
Yeah, decide to have an event and come up for, the Cherry Festival. That's really smart, right? Smart is working with Hans and Jim Lively, Groundworks, and formerly the Michigan Land Use Institute. It's been a pleasure over the last 20 years to work with you, not just to fight the fight, as we put it, but to play to win and get things done. So let's see if we can sum up line 5 in the following very quick way, Hans, and then talk about the Trump administration's war on the Great Lakes. Enbridge had the worst pipeline spill in history, dumping 1 million gallons of oil into the Kalamazoo River that took 4 to 5 years to clean up. The same company has a more than 60-year-old aging pipeline going through the Straits of Mackinac. About the worst place in the Great Lakes to have an oil spill would be the Straits of Mackinac. Should we do something about this? That's what this boils down to. The organizing, the work in the court of public opinion that Groundworks and others have done have made this a political issue that the leadership of this state has to deal with. And they have to deal with it in a way that the current status quo, I don't think to anybody is acceptable. The issue is not whether the pipeline will be closed up. The question is how fast and how long do we have to wait with how much risk. Okay, why do we care about the Great Lakes and what's going on with it? I use the term war on the Great Lakes, and I mean that. The Great Lakes, we all know, supplies safe drinking water supply to 42 million people in 8 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces. It's 21% of the world's fresh water supply. It's where people in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois live, play, and work. It's about our ecology and ecological health. It's about our economy, whether it's tourism or fishing. It's about recreation, where we sit on the beach, where we swim, where we boat, where we enjoy the outdoors. President Trump was elected in November of 2016 by a little bit over 80,000 votes. That's the margin in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. He won his election politically in the Great Lakes states, mostly by pretty narrow margins. President Trump, as a matter of policy and practice, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is waging a war on the Great Lakes in the very states that he won politically when it comes to policy and the actions the administration is taking. It's a war on the Great Lakes. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, let's start ticking it off. First of all, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, a widely popular program, 3,000 projects over the last 6 or 7 years, $2.2 billion. Infrastructure projects, restoration projects, preserving habitat, keeping invasive species out of the lakes, helping fix shorelines up, protecting and preserving beaches. Nobody thinks this is a bad idea. This is practical, sensible, smart stuff about the Great Lakes. Republicans support it, Democrats support it. Governors like it, mayors like it. Chambers of commerce like it, labor unions like it. Creates jobs. It's not a partisan issue. President Trump's fiscal year 2017 budget, as you probably know, completely eliminated funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Okay, he was new to office. Maybe somebody wasn't paying attention. The funding was put back in because there was a continuing resolution for the budget. Comes back, fiscal year 2018 budget. Zeroes out funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Governor Rick Snyder of Michigan, Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. Governor Walker, not somebody known notably as an environmental leader. Both write letters saying, put the money back in. Congressman Fred Upton, Senator Debbie Stabenow, Senator Gary Peters. In Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown, a Democrat, Senator Rob Portman, a Republican, all write to the president saying, put the money back in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This $300 million each year is providing huge benefits to protect and restore the Great Lakes. What's he thinking? You would have thought maybe with all that coming, the president, his EPA administrator, others would have said, all right, we get it. We've heard from everybody. We won our election in these states. The mayors, the governors, the senators, the representatives are telling us this is really important. It's a program that works and works well. Nada. The proposal is still to zero it out. That's one. Number two, you may have read about it over the weekend. The administration's Department of Commerce is proposing to review and reconsider the expansion of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. About 4,000 miles of Lake Huron that were put into a National Marine Sanctuary. It's a pretty neat place, a lot of shipwrecks, widespread support. You haven't heard anybody mounting a campaign like the campaign against Line 5, rescind the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. There's no pressure on the administration to roll that back. It's supported by Republicans, by Democrats. It's a good thing. The administration has come out and said, we want to reconsider and review the designation of the expanded Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which goes from about the Mackinac Bridge down past Alpena. What are they thinking? Why? Who are they responding to? You might think, well, maybe people want to drill for oil and gas there. Not that it's such a great place to drill for oil and gas, but there are folks who might want to do that. As you probably know, the state of Michigan passed a law. The then Michigan Land Use Institute was involved in this. It said no oil and gas drilling in Michigan's waters on the Great Lakes. That was passed in 2002. Can't drill. What are they thinking? Proposal to move the Great Lakes office US EPA Region 5 from the Chicago headquarters, 1,000 people work there, to Lenexa, Kansas. Anybody know where Lenexa, Kansas is? All right, I had to look it up, so I did, okay? There's Kansas City. Some of you may have heard of Overland Park. It's a suburb of Kansas City. Then you go out further. There's Lenexa, Kansas. All right. An Enbridge pipeline breaks on the Kalamazoo River, or Lord forbid, somewhere else. Where is the emergency response team going to do the best job, being based in Chicago or Lenexa, Kansas? In dealing with Superfund sites, in terms of doing monitoring on water quality in the Great Lakes, should the team be in Lenexa, Kansas or Chicago? EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt a couple weeks ago got grilled by a House committee on why the administration was proposing to transfer the staff from EPA Region 5 headquarters in Chicago to Lenexa, Kansas. He backed off and said, well, that's just sort of a rumor. We don't now plan to do it. Score one of how people can make a difference. Editorial support, news article, letters, comments written. Members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, said, what are you doing? Governors and mayors said, what are you doing? They backed off. What that shows is that people working together on a bipartisan basis with our mayors, our governors, our chambers of commerce, our labor unions, other environmental and conservation groups, our senators, our representatives, we can play to win. We can win on the Great Lakes and protecting safe, clean drinking water. That's a value that is shared by people in Michigan and by people around the Midwest who are practical and sensible. So here's something we did. Some of you may know after the election, the Environmental Law and Policy Center retained Hans Selzer. Hans Selzer is one of the best political pollsters and marketers in the country. She does the Iowa poll for the Des Moines Register. She does a lot of work for Gannett, and it's terrific. We retained her to conduct 12 focus groups of Trump voters in February. Half rural, half working class. 4 in Grand Rapids, 4 focus groups. 4 focus groups in Toledo, Ohio, 4 focus groups in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In other words, on the Great Lakes, Midwest states, swing areas of swing states. These are people who voted for Trump in November of 2016 and who were 3s to 7s on a 1 to 10 environmental scale, okay? A 10 would be someone in this category. I believe strongly in climate change. Bill McKibben is right. I really don't like Secretary Clinton, so I voted for Trump, okay? We didn't want the 8s, 9s, and 10s. Nor did we want the 1s and 2s, people who think climate change is a hoax. So it's the 3s to 7s, okay? People who care about the environment are in the middle and voted for Trump. Here's what we learned. When it comes to safe, clean drinking water, the people in the focus groups, 12 of them, probably sound a heck of a lot like the people who were in the conference room this afternoon at Groundworks. They all support safe, clean drinking water. It's a common shared value. It's one where we know we have problems. Flint, everybody was talking about Flint. And when it came to the Great Lakes, everybody said, of course we have to protect the Great Lakes. That's where we swim, it's where we get our water, it's where we fish, it's where we boat, it's what makes this a great place to live. So Ann pushed them a little bit, said, let's talk about regulation. What do you think about regulation? Not surprisingly, Trump voters, a lot of conversation about too much paperwork, government overreaching. She asked some questions and about, what do you think about regulation for clean water? The answer was, of course, that's common sense. Yeah, we need to cut back regulation, but not for clean water. Everybody gets it. If somebody pollutes upstream, it affects the water quality downstream where I live. If the lakes are contaminated, like Lake Erie was with toxic blue-green algae, 500,000 people didn't have safe drinking water for 72 hours. What we've learned from this is that when it comes to clean, safe drinking water, when it comes to protecting and restoring the Great Lakes, this is a shared value in Michigan and around the common sense Midwestern people who deal with these issues. People look at it, it doesn't matter that much whether they're Republican or Democrat or women or men. It doesn't matter a heck of a lot whether people are urban or rural or suburban. Shared value, 80% on up to protect and restore the Great Lakes. I knew we sort of crossed a threshold when one of the congresspeople in the Chicago area, Congressman Peter Roskin. Peter is a very conservative Republican. His League of Conservation voting record is 3%. That means, according to the League of Conservation voters, once out of 33 times, he voted right from LCB's perspective. Having known Peter for a few years, I was really wondering, what was that issue anyway? We knew him from when he was a state representative. ELPC's co-legislative director is a Republican who was the Natural Resources Director and environmental advisor to Governor Jim Edgar. We were sort of scratching our heads. We got to look up and see where he voted right. Peter Roscoe writes a letter to the president saying, please keep the money in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And there's a 2-column long story with his picture in the Chicago Sun-Times, which means that his media people really worked hard to get that placed because he knew it, he understood when they polled the voters in his district, which he won by 20 points in November of 2016, that this was an issue people care about. So let's go back and conclude with, what is President Trump thinking? He won his election in the Great Lakes, and his policies and his practices and his budget decision when it comes to protecting and restoring the Great Lakes, and when it comes to protecting safe, clean drinking water, just goes in the opposite direction. It's bad policy, it's bad politics, and if we put together the right grassroots organizing among people and reaching out to our congressional delegations and our mayors and our governors, we can win on this. This isn't about fighting the good fight. This isn't about putting out another press release. This is about getting people together and playing to win and getting it done. And here's what we need to do. We need to win these big this year. We won on moving the EPA regional office. We can win on Thunder Bay. We can win on restoring the funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And if we win this year big time on that, going into 2018, an election year, hopefully some people in the political staff of the White House will say, you know what? Both Republicans and Democrats are telling us this is bad policy. It's bad politics too. Let's bring this to an end. We will protect and restore the Great Lakes and do it better, and we will better protect safe, clean drinking water for 42 million people here in Michigan, 7 other U.S. states, and Canadian provinces, and that is a success for the environmental community. So let's work together to get it done. Thank you.
So now it's time for conversation and questions for any topic or anything else we didn't talk about. Feel free.
You got the pretty dynamic duo here of Hans and Howard. Hey Dennis, what's up?
Hey Howard. Well, I'm curious as to what your take is on this proposal about doing a tunnel under the Straits pipeline. Is that something that you could see as a realistic alternative, or do you think it's just just, I mean, I'd like to see it decommissioned completely, but, you know, the report, you know, says what it says, and that's an option. So what's your take on it?
I'm skeptical about it for 3 reasons. First of all, the engineering to do it is going to be expensive and difficult. And I think Enbridge itself is going to have to look at it and say, do we really want to go to all the time and trouble? Secondly, the price of oil, as you probably know, is below $50 right now per barrel. Folks at Goldman Sachs and others think it's going to stay in the low 50s. The reason that's important is in the market for oil sands in Canada to really be economic, the price of oil's got to be about $80 a barrel on up. That's WTI to be technical, West Texas Intermediate crude. But there's a big gap between $80 and the low 50s. And over time, there just won't be that much oil going through pipeline if the market stays around 50. Bakken oil in North Dakota has a break even around $54, $55. So absent the price of oil going up, the economics are not all that promising for pipeline companies like Enbridge. They'll be carrying less oil. Finally, we haven't sorted through all the legal issues, but if they move to put in a tunnel underneath the lake bed, almost certainly they're going to have to go through a new permitting process. There are various environmental permits and reviews that have to be done, and that is going to take a lot of time and effort, and that's going to be an opportunity for Enbridge to, I think, run into a lot of legal as well as court of public opinion opposition. So I'm skeptical that Enbridge will want to go through the tunnel route. I don't think that for Enbridge it will probably make a lot of sense. It's an interesting thing for dynamic risk assessment, the consultant, to suggest to put on the table. But when you look at just the engineering difficulty and cost combined with the economics of oil prices compared with the legal issues that get raised, I'm skeptical that even Enbridge will want to go there.
So I'm curious, does Michigan benefit in some way economically from that pipeline? Are there royalties, or are they is this just because of the easement?
There's no royalty paid. It's not like a oil well that provides royalties. There are some taxes and some jobs.
Yeah.
But again, the key factor to keep in mind is that Michigan is a shortcut to get to markets, to the refinery in Sarnia and markets in the Northeast and overseas.
Yeah, so there's not a huge benefit as opposed to
compared to the huge
here.
risk, there's not much benefit.
But there's no money, really, no significant money at stake.
No, it's hard to document exactly how much, but it's not significant.
Yeah. Do people understand that? Why would anybody be in favor of keeping this thing?
Yeah, Enbridge has certainly stepped up its outreach in Lansing to sort of make their case, but their data to back it up is not that strong.
And Enbridge is a Canadian company,
Canadian
right? So all the profits go back to Canada anyway.
And that's one of the reasons that the Attorney General's strong statements demonstrate that, someone who's been the Attorney General and who's seeking to be the governor is ready to step out with that kind of language. It opens up opportunities for others to come into that center of the conversation and join that position.
I was going to ask if either Groundworks or your group, Howard, expects to be able to formulate, a recommendation as to an alternative, but I wonder, based on the economic scenario, is that even our job to do that here in Michigan?
Well, our initial reading of the advisory board's report show that they have not fully developed an alternative that makes a case for shutting it down. That it's not really looking at other avenues that Michigan could get the oil that it does need to continue its economic growth. So we have been working on demonstrating that other pipelines coming through southern Michigan, like 6B, could carry more capacity to serve our needs. And if the consultants, after a year-long process, have not created that data, then it is incumbent on us to make that case. And that's what you'll hear from us in the next few weeks, kind of compiling all the research and data that we've developed to really strengthen the voice of the broadest mainstream population we can to say, shut this down. It's not in our interest, and we can get the oil we need from other sources. So it's unfortunate that it's our responsibility, but that's the way
that's a good
this
answer.
has been playing out. Mary.
Matt, who many of us would like to elect in 2018, brought up the point that it's difficult as a politician to get the votes of the people in the UP because they believe if that pipeline is removed, then their propane will even be more expensive. What's the truth of that issue?
Well, there are lots of options to get propane to the UP that don't include Line 5, which could be trucks. You know, there's not a great volume. It's an important and essential service to the UP, but the alternatives to getting propane to the UP are right there in front of us. So to say that you can't shut down Line 5 because the people in the UP will go without propane is a false argument. There is a mentality, a culture that is about resource extraction in the UP and jobs created around the industry, whether it's mining or other forms of extraction. So I think the opportunity is to educate about what jobs are being created, what alternatives do exist, and put facts on the table and have a discussion that are informed with the real matters of what's happening.
Howard, you've heard a lot about Canadian drinking water is being jeopardized. Is there any response from Canadian citizenry, any outrage or even concern about this pipeline?
There's a lot of concern from among the Canadians. I was at a small lunch with the Premier of Ontario, and Ontario gets drinking water supply from the Great Lakes. They have a keen interest in what happens. Enbridge is a Canadian company, and on the one hand, they're concerned on the Canadian side about protecting safe, clean drinking water for Canadians as well as for Americans. Enbridge has clout here. They have more clout in Canada, and they're under a lot of economic pressure right now because oil prices are low. I mean, the wild card in all this, and something we have absolutely no control over, is the global price of oil. The fact of the matter is, if oil prices hypothetically were $150 a barrel, there would be a lot of oil and drilling activity, a lot of tar sands activity up in Fort McMurray in Alberta, and they'd be pushing that oil out. They'd be trying to get it to markets. If oil stays in the $40 range, there's a lot less activity. The same is true in Bakken. There's an interesting chart. You can basically track Bakken oil drilling by looking at two pieces of information that are easily available on the internet. One is the daily rig count in North Dakota, which the North Dakota Oil and Gas Division publishes. Hey, I'm a real energy wonk, okay? Anybody who says they look most days at the rig count of the North Dakota Oil and Gas Division, you get your energy wonk badge. And the other is just, what's the price of oil? You know, in the same reason that there's some concerns here about industries that are under distress, and what was done in the United States, for example, to bail out the auto industry at the beginning of the Obama administration. And what you're seeing President Trump try to do with the coal industry, I don't think he'll be successful when he's trying to do it. You're seeing a fair amount of Canadian interest, particularly in the western part of Canada and Alberta, the provincial systems being very strong in Canada, of trying to look out for Enbridge and the other oil companies. So I think on the Line 5 issue, in Canada they're much more betwixt and between because of the importance of Enbridge and oil in the Canadian economy. When it comes to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, when it comes to the federal clean water rule that the EPA is trying to turn backwards on, you know, these are issues upon which we align very tightly with Canadians. The Canadian Consul General for the Midwest is based in Chicago, and he and I are supposed to get together for lunch later this month. I think we'll have a whole lot in common to talk about.
Barry?
So if we're going to play to win,
That's the only way we're going to play.
right, how do we keep the grassroots activists really engaged when this is really taking a long time?
Two things. One, you got to win. Okay. One reason it was so important to win and stopping the move of the EPA Great Lakes office from Chicago to Lenexa, Kansas, is it showed everybody, if you fight and you fight hard and you play to win, you can win and you can make a difference. Okay? You know, we all know how it goes. You know, whether you did sports as a kid and so forth, success begat success. We need to win in order to keep winning. And that means we can't be satisfied with, we fought the good fight. We need to play to win, get wins, build more momentum, and also be able not just to go back to the grassroots and say, you made a difference, see, this changed things, but be able to go to our congressional delegation and our governors and mayors and be able to say, you said to the president that this was a bad thing to do, it was bad policy, and it had an impact. Step up again. You can win again. We need to keep that momentum going. And that's why the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary doesn't cover the whole Great Lakes. But it's a really misguided, foolish decision. We need to push back hard and we need to win on it. We need to get money back in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative from Congress. If we get those three wins, not moving the EPA regional office, Great Lakes funding goes forward, Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the idea of reconsidering and reviewing it sort of goes off into the setting sun, while we're fighting to keep a fight against the rollback of the clean water standards, clean, safe drinking water. That's one success, two success, three success, that begets more. People get engaged and they see that they can win, they get wins going, creates momentum, and somebody in the White House then says, what are we thinking here? This is bad policy, it's also bad politics, it's going to hurt us in November of 2018 and hurt us in November of 2020. That's how we win. Yes, ma'am?
The technology is available for the pipeline pigs inspecting the pipelines. Why is that not mandatory? Why is it not being talked about more? And I'm not saying that it's a solution to Line 5, but why are they not regularly inspecting the pipeline? Why does the state of Michigan not require that?
Well, there's been a number of violations of the original 1953 easement that have been documented. But in the last couple of years, as the spotlight has been shined on Line 5, there has been much more inspection, much more upgrades, a much more thorough safety response plan. So they are conducting those inspections. But inspection doesn't prevent a rupture from happening. It's a method of, investigation to make sure there's nothing imminent that's, easily changed. But, the key thing to remember really is between the two shutoff valves of Line 5, there's 1 million gallons of oil in the pipeline. And by increasing inspection, that doesn't prevent risk. And if a rupture were to happen, that's 1 million gallons that would flow into the Straits, which move in all different directions, and if you've seen the computer models, would spread hundreds of miles. So there has been increased inspections, there is technology, Enbridge is doing everything they can to demonstrate that it is safe, but not enough to really assure the public that the Great Lakes will be protected.
Let me try just a complimentary piece to what Hans said. Enbridge has a lot of incentives to try to inspect and do its very best to run an aging pipeline well. Okay, it's not in Enbridge's interest for there to be a catastrophic spill. It's just not. But it's sort of like if you have an old Chevy Beater, that's in this case 60 years old. You can try to make it work and you can try to make it run, but it's challenging. and in the vernacular, stuff happens, okay? The problem on this one is that stuff can happen. And in this case, it happens at about one of the worst places it could happen in the Great Lakes. So the question is, do you want to roll the dice on this? You know, Enbridge does have an incentive to try to do it right, and I don't want to say they're bad people. I mean, this is not good people, bad people. But for example, when the Coast Guard was asked, if there were a spill, how long would it take you to get all your equipment there? They said it would take them about 2 days from the Saginaw area. And if it were in the winter, when it's icy there, this was going to be, let's just say, very, very hard. It's a really bad place to have a problem. It took Enbridge more than 4 years to clean up the spill on the Kalamazoo River, which is much, much more accessible. So this is about risk and how do you balance risk. This is not about, is Enbridge going to try to do a good job of inspection? We don't need to throw mud on them from that. They have an incentive to do that. It's about having an aging pipeline in a really bad place, and if stuff happens, the impacts can be catastrophic, and it's very, very hard to get there to really clean it up. That's what this is about. Yeah.
I have questions about the advisory panel and the upcoming meeting on the 24th. I guess what I want to know is what clout, if any, do they have? And are there any points of leverage for us? And I'm also wondering about this, one of the 2 studies coming up with a conflict of interest. Can you talk about the panel?
Want me to do a take on it? Hans, we'll do a little Hans and Howard back and forth here. First of all, the panel has a lot of people who are good people, including some of our friends. And I think they're serious about what they're doing, and they want to do a good job. Ultimately, there are 3 people who are going to be vitally important in terms of making this decision. Governor Snyder, Attorney General Schuette, and Governor Snyder's Michigan Department of Environmental Quality Director, Heidi Grether. Those 3 people are the ones who are really going to make the decision. I do think that they will be interested and will value hearing from the advisory council. I really do. I think they're serious about that. I don't think there's any reason to doubt that. I don't know that they will necessarily follow it. Those 3 people together will make a decision. And in making that decision, facts will matter, the reports will matter, and their own instincts and assessment of the risks here will matter, as will the court of public opinion, which is where Hans and I started. This is an issue that's about policy, it's about engineering, it's about oil price economics, and it's also how much risk does the public want to tolerate in this location, and the assessment by the political leaders of to what degree are they willing to go with the public if the public thinks the risk is too much. The conflict problem is unfortunate for 2 reasons. One, come on folks, if you're a consultant doing the study and you know you can't touch anything with Enbridge, what are you doing? But it's also unfortunate because what it does is it pushes back the process and it maintains the status quo while the state looks to get another consultant to do the work. That's not good for us. It's not good for us that there's a consultant who's been tainted by a relationship with Enbridge, but the penalty, if you will, for that is not something that helps us in terms of the greater amount of time that it will take to have a new consultant do the analysis without the tinge of a conflict with Enbridge.
I would add to that, there's no legal authority from the advisory board's recommendations. It is a document to inform a process, but there's no binding legal authority whatsoever. A conflict, the experts in this industry in their career have worked for pipeline companies. So it's unfortunate that there's been a conflict of interest around this risk assessment report. And I really think back to the community organizing, grassroots campaigning, what it does is it creates a platform for citizens to push harder, to there's more data on the table. The option of decommissioning Line 5 is one of the recommended options to consider, and we can make that case that we don't need the oil and, you know, push our decision makers towards that outcome. And one point that, to Mary's point earlier about, you know, how do we keep this momentum going? I think it's about broadening the participation of different voices. That's why we founded the Great Lakes Business Network, to get the private sector to lean on the elected officials. And that's how important these local resolutions coming from townships and cities and counties have been. But, you know, many of us have already written our letters, and we need to keep writing letters. But if there's a strategy, is that now we have a new platform. Decommissioning Line 5 is one of the recommended alternatives to study. We can ramp up our campaign and get more diverse voices calling for the very same thing. And when the Attorney General of Michigan is one of those voices who said we need to decommission Line 5 and put an accountable timeline on the table, that adds to our strength. And the concern that, oh, are we going to do another assessment, another study, and delay things? We have to counter that right away to say, we don't need another risk assessment. What we need is action. We've been studying this issue. There's a task force before the advisory council. There's a fair bit of data out there that shows what a calamity we would have. What we need to do is look at those alternatives, make the case, and build that pressure from not just activists, but regular people, business leaders, and across the political spectrum.
So do you guys have, is there some data on what the expected lifetime of this thing is? I mean, it's got to, everything has a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there
I don't
any
know how
experience
the
or?
energy, you have perspective on that?
You know, with pipelines, there isn't a uniform lifetime because different pipelines carry different types of materials. Some carry dilbit, it's a diluent for bitumen, which is oil sands oil. Some carry light oil, you've heard of light crude, intermediate crude, bitumen, which is what oil sands is, tar sands, oil sands, tends to be pretty corrosive. So different materials in different pipelines in different conditions. Salt water versus fresh water. Okay, the Great Lakes is fresh water. But the freeze and heating up of water puts added pressure too. So there's not a uniform standard with regard to all pipelines have the same life no matter where they are and what they're carrying. The real question is, here's a pipeline that's aging, it's been operating for more than 60 years in a place that if there were to be a spill is about as bad as you can get in the Great Lakes. This is a place to be extra careful. Its time has come, as I think Attorney General Schuette said in a different way.
One and then two.
If the worst were to happen, does Enbridge have the resources, both financial and structural, in place that they could clean it up before it decimated everything that it could?
There's a whole lot of depends. It depends, is it in the winter when it's frozen? That makes a big difference on how you could clean it up. Secondly, it depends on what's the water level at the time and what are the winds at the time. How much was released? There's some very good modeling that's been done by Schwab from the University of Michigan that shows what the impacts would be of a spill in different conditions. But again, it's sort of not one size fits all. How many booms can you get in place? How fast do you put them in the right places, as it turns out, or not? How fast does the Coast Guard operate to back up when Enbridge does? If there is, Lord forbid, a spill, we want Enbridge to do the best, fastest, quickest, greatest job ever of cleaning it up. Nobody has an interest otherwise. But a whole lot depends on what are the weather conditions, what's the time of day, is it at night rather than during the day, do they get the team out there quickly? Again, there's not an automatic. You can construct a scenario in which they do a bang-up job and that's in everybody's interest. You can construct a scenario, quite frankly, in which it's the winter, it's on a weekend at night when there's a spill, somebody doesn't realize immediately what's going on. It's very difficult for everybody to get together in the middle of a snowstorm. play it out under different scenarios. It's not a one-size-fits-all. That's also why this is a very problematic location. And again, just compare and contrast to Kalamazoo. Don't take this as saying that the Kalamazoo spill was a good thing or easy. It was neither of them, okay? But you're on a river that's contained. The river is in one place. The conditions in Kalamazoo are, generally speaking, far calmer than they are in the Straits of Mackinac. It was an easier place to get to do the cleanup, and it took 4 years. I mean, this is not an easy problem. Let's hope and do our very best to make sure it doesn't happen.
So we're getting a little tight on time, but we have 3 hands up. So you want to do these last 3, and then feel free to stick around and chat and eat and drink.
You ask 3 questions, and Hans and I will be really quick. How's that?
1, 2, 3.
So my question refers to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. It seems very clear that there's been some good groundwork laid, some good action plans put in place. I'm curious if what groundworks plans might be in terms of organizing around the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, as well as because our elected officials seem to be supporting this, is there a different place we should be trying to put our actions other than saying thank you to them? Is there a way that we can get our voices heard and get out there better?
Well, I'll start that and then pass it to Howard. I don't know how this is resonating in this region, but there's not a lot of awareness about the threats to the Great Lakes funding in the mainstream conversation. I was talking to somebody earlier, maybe because we're all talking about Line 5, but the local nonprofits in this region, including us, have not been involved in this issue, which is one of the reasons I was so excited to bring Howard here, because his organization is a lead organization on what those solutions are. So I think we have to elevate the prominence. There's some media attention. IPR did an interview with Howard today. Some journalists are here at this event. And I think it's an opportunity for collaboration. When you're kind of a stretched nonprofit, you can't take everything on, but I think we have an obligation in this region to inform ourselves and give people avenues for getting involved. And what we can do is commit to making sure that other groups are tuned in, and that we're leaning on Howard as a coordinating resource for the action plan. So I'll pass it to you on that.
So real quickly, 1, that's why we're here today. And number 2, Groundworks, of which I serve on the advisory board, has done a wonderful job of being focused effectively on Line 5. Groundworks, like other groups, can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, that's what we have to do in the world in which we operate. 3rd and finally, it's about intensity when it comes to politics. People talk about, does somebody send a letter? We want the congressional delegation to be saying to the Trump administration, put the money back in, really, we mean it. And that's from them hearing again and again from people, from editorial writers in the media when they come back home. Keep the pressure on.
Ross.
Question for Mr. Lerner. I'm curious to know what sort of leverage you think you see as the state of Michigan having when it comes to the 1953 agreement. And I'm going to stop short of calling it an easement because it purports to be an easement, but I'm not quite sure that it actually is. But in short, it's great. I'm a former political organizer myself at the grassroots level, all 4 grassroots campaigns. But at some point, you're going to have Enbridge in the room and the Attorney General and Governor Snyder, and they're going to essentially be asking Enbridge to walk away from an agreement that may be 64 years old, but ostensibly gives them the right to pump oil through the Straits in perpetuity. So I'm just sort of curious where you think, what legal grounds are they standing on when they're telling them that they've got to shut down Line 5 in that situation?
Here's what I don't want to do. Along with some people at Flow and a number of the other lawyers, we've been looking at that issue. And we know it pretty well. And there's some pros and there's some cons. you don't talk about litigation strategy in a room with a lot of people. It's just not the right conversation to have, okay? Suffice it to say, we think the state of Michigan can act, and they should act, okay?
John, last question.
Yeah. Is there anyone in the world that has the knowledge of how to handle a freshwater oil spill in February under 3 foot of ice?
You know, I think, John, that's exactly the question that ought to be addressed to Michigan DEQ Director Heidi Grether when she meets with people. And as you know, Heidi came from BP. I think you'll perhaps find interesting what her response would be on that. It's a good question for people to ask her at a public forum for exactly that reason.
Okay, one very last question from Mary.
Okay, so.
Mary, Hans is not going to say no to you.
So if we're trying to activate our local base about the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, what can we say are the local consequences of withdrawing those funds?
The best thing to say is to have some examples, which we'll be glad to share with you. Amy will be glad to share with you and others. Here's how the funds have been used in this area. You know, we talked at lunch a little bit about the Kids Creek Restoration Project, the work to reduce invasive species, the work on the Boardman River Dam. You know, lots of good local examples of where it's made a difference and people support it, okay? That's why the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is working, not just out of a big concept, but because people are seeing the real world practical benefits in their communities. This is smart and sensible. Let's win. Thank you.